Just to give you a very brief overview, Horizonte is focused in Brazil. We are developing the Araguaia nickel project, which is shaping up to be a major new nickel discovery. We own 100% of it. We have Teck Resources as a major shareholder. And on the project, on our gold projects, we have AngloGold Ashanti as a partner on the gold projects. And over the next 12 to 24 months, we'll be taking the Araguaia project through the preliminary economic assessment into a pre-feas and into a full bankable feasibility study. The current resource out on the project, which we put out in March this year, in January this year, is 100 million tonnes at a global resource of around 1.3% nickel. There is room to expand that. We've got a clear development pipeline going forwards, as I said, taking it through to bankable feasibility. We're well funded today. We've got 4.8 million in the company, and we have a downstream royalty funding initiative as well, which brings in another non-dilutive financing option there. And we've increased our management team and board to effectively take this project right the way through to bankable. In terms of the team, chairman is David Hall. He was head of AngloGold, running their South American operations based in São Paulo. I'm a geologist. I've worked extensively in South America. I've worked with David now for nearly 10 years, and we set the company up together. Antonio Almeida has just joined us, actually. He was running Vale's copper operations in Africa, and also Felt Dodge's operations in Brazil, a huge amount of experience in Brazil. Roger Billington has worked with us now as a technical advisor for 2 years. He was working with Xstrata and ourselves and has come over full-time to us. His last role in the major arena was running Falconbridge's worldwide nickel laterite portfolio, and his last major development project there was Koniambo, which actually comes online this year with Xstrata. Alan Walker is over here running a group called Black River Asset Management, which is part of the US Cargill Group. They have a lot of South American, London business transactions. Owen Bavington joined us in December. He was head of Anglo-American worldwide exploration until his retirement mid last year. Deeply involved in the Barro Alto nickel project in Brazil, which is now commercially producing nickel. Alex Christopher is head of new business development at Teck, overviews any new transaction that comes through Teck. He joined us as part of the acquisition of the project from Teck. And William Fisher joined us when we got our full TSX listing last year. He was chairman of Aurelian, which was a gold company in Ecuador, bought out by Kinross for $1.5 billion. So a lot of transactional experience there. All of our projects are located up in this north-central region of Brazil. It's a region called the Carajás. It is a major mining district. Very simple rationale. You've got the infrastructure there. It's much easier taking something through the exploration stages and into development with that infrastructure in place. We have a very clear commodity split. We have a fully funded gold portfolio here, 3 joint ventures, 2 of those with AngloGold Ashanti and 1 with Troy Resources, which is an Australian gold producer. And all of our funding goes into developing Araguaia. A little bit about Brazil. Probably don't need to spend too long on this slide. It is obviously a growth economy. It's a major minerals producer, principally in the bulks, iron ore, aluminium. There is a lot of gold activity as well. And over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, I think you're going to see Brazil really grow, especially with the new Santos oil discovery, which is going forwards at a fairly rapid pace. You've got a very good, well-developed mining code, and it's very easy for a junior company like us to operate in Brazil. And it's a clear, well-developed mining code. It means we can compete shoulder to shoulder with a company like Vale or Anglo American, and we've actually won in licensing rounds against the majors. Also a little bit about nickel. Nickel doesn't get a lot of market attention. You obviously hear a lot about copper, a lot about iron ore. All the time the fundamentals behind those commodities is strong. Nickel gets taken along with it. Primary use is in stainless steel. Around 70% of production goes into stainless steel. Growth principally driven out of China, running at about 12% over the next 4 to 5 years. We are actually developing a nickel laterite project. One of the key factors about nickel laterites is typically they are lower cost in terms of where they sit on the cost curve, the new ferronickel operations. There is some bad press about nickel laterites, principally on the back of BHP's failure with Ravensthorpe in Australia. However, today nickel laterites account for about 48% of global nickel production, In the next 2 years, that's due to go up to around 56%. So as with any mining project, it comes down to the quality of the underlying asset and where you are producing in the world. And that leads us nicely into why nickel in Brazil. This shows that Carajás region in a bit more detail. The blue lines here are high-tension hydroelectric power lines from the Tucari hydroelectric dam that was built by the government in the 1990s. So it's low-cost power here in this part of Brazil. Everything is hydro. You've got 2 railroads, one here from the port at San Luis that runs down into the heart of Carajás. And this route here is a brand new rail line that actually opened last year. And in 2014, there's a spur that goes within 14 kilometres of our project. So globally, the infrastructure here is very good. Most of the projects are accessible by tarred highways, and there's 2 airports. Our project is shown here with the red flag, Araguaia. And this table here on the right is really just to highlight the producing nickel laterites around us in Brazil. The largest is Jacaré here with Anglo American. That's 290 million tonnes at 1.3% nickel. That's going into feasibility. At the bottom end of the table, we have a project called Nicolandia, which has been operating for 25 years by the private group Votorantim Metais. 60 million tonnes at 1.4% nickel. Once Puma, which is over here, went into production in November 2010 by Vale. Barro Alto, Anglo-American's latest new nickel project, that started up in March last year. They produced 18,000 tonnes of nickel last year, and they're going to go up to nameplate capacity this year. It's a textbook example of a nickel laterite that's been built on time and on budget. And finally here we have Xstrata's asset, which is called Serra da Tapa. That's actually 60 kilometres north of us, and that's 60 million tonnes at 1.6% nickel. Just showing you our global resource there, the 100 million tonnes at 1.3% nickel, and we have a high-grade core here which will be increasing, which is currently around 24 million tonnes at 1.6. We aim to get that up to somewhere around 40 million tonnes in the next 8 months. So we're actually competing very favourably against those major company projects, and it's the only company now of this size in Brazil not owned by a major mining company in development. A couple of other things. We've just talked about these 2 new Brazilian operations, Barro Alto and Once Puma. There is no other district in the world today that has 2 brand new ferronickel operations. And when I talk about ferronickel, the process of producing nickel in iron has been around for 100 years. There's currently around 12 of these plants out there in the world. So it's not a new process, it's tried and tested. We were actually on Barro Alto about a month ago. As I said, that was actually built on time and on budget. And they will be up to that full 36,000 tonnes of nickel this year. Once Puma, a little bit behind there, it is producing, and there's not that much new information out of Vale on that. But again, a textbook project there. This just shows the infrastructure around our project. We have our regional office in a place called Conceição de Araguaia, which is a town of 40,000 people. There's an airport, that's our core storage facility. And that's that new north-south rail line taken in January 2011. As I say, there are trains now running on that. This map here shows our land position. It hasn't actually come out very well on this slide, but it's a big area. It's 1,000 kilometres squared. We own 100% of it. There are 4 main resource areas. These areas to the south here, Picazeiro and Bayon, account for about 50% of our 100 million tonnes. And then the balance sits up here in these 2 areas, Oito and Vioito. These areas here are where we're getting some of our best grades. You can see some of the drill intervals there, 18 metres at 2.4% nickel. That's extremely high. And the likely start of operations is in this area here called Picazeiro and Bayon here. This is typical in Brazil, where you have numerous deposits within about 15 or 20 kilometres of trucking, and there'll be a centralised plant that they'll be trucked into. This slide here just shows that Picazeiro target. That's about 2 kilometres long. And the areas in dark blue are a vertical thickness of over 2 metres at over 1% nickel. Anything over 2 metres you can bulk mine. The green, the green is 20 metres, and the red areas are over 30 metres. So essentially everything in that area will be mined. So it's not where you've just got sort of high grades scattered all over the place that you actually can't head up mining. It's all very good, consistent mineralisation. What does it look like on the ground? That's that Picazeiro target. fairly unexciting. The good thing about nickel laterites is you don't get a good soil profile developed on them, so there's no primary forest. It's not good for agriculture. This is typically used for cattle grazing. Strangely enough, it's good for growing pineapples on randomly. And also, it is low population density. This area is, the total surface area is owned by about 4 or 5 cattle ranches, so you haven't got lots of isolated communities that you've got to look at rehousing. So both from an environmental and a social point of view, very low issues there. This shows our resource that we put out in January. The key thing I want to highlight here is it's dominated by what we call transition and saprolite. Nickel laterites effectively form on the surface, and in our particular case, they go down for about 20 or 30 meters depth. So it's basically an earth-moving operation. Our particular deposit, as all of these Brazilian examples are dominated by what you call transition and saprolite. This is the lower part of the ore body, and we have about 80% of the resource made up of this material. What that means is it's got low iron content and you can produce ferronickel from it. And ferronickel is basically, you end up with typically a golf ball sized pellet that contains somewhere between 20 or 15 to 30% nickel and the balance iron. And you can sell that directly into the stainless steel mills, and you can sell it at the mine gate and you get spot price for it. We have a small component of limonite, which is the upper portion of the ore body. The problem with the limonite is it has high iron content and you can't produce ferronickel from it. But actually what we're going to end up doing is blending that as part of the process, and all of this will be used to produce ferronickel, so there will not be any waste here. A lot of our peer group in Africa and Australia, for example, are limonite-dominated deposits, and it's just a function of what the underlying rocks are, and you can't choose how your deposit ends up forming. If you have a limonite deposit, you can't use ferronickel, and you've got to look at one of these high-cost processes like HPAL or tank or heap leach. And in the case of tank leach, there's no actual commercial operation out there today. So really, from a mineralogical point of view, we've de-risked this, and from a resource point of view. We've run 3 parallel phase 1 test routes at the moment. One is obviously on the ferronickel route. We used Xstrata to do this test work. They're one of the leaders globally. We've been successful in producing a ferronickel with around 30% nickel in that. We've also run heap and tank leach test work, and again, we've got good nickel recoveries there. The principal reason is that BHP at their Colombian operation, Cerro Matoso, they are actually leaching that limonite layer. So we want to do this work now and not find that we need to have done that in a year's time. So we're running everything in parallel. But we will be going forwards with that ferronickel process. This is actually a pilot plant in Brazil that we visited about 4 or 5 months ago. And the next stage of our test work will be to run a 200-ton bulk sample through that pilot plant. And that will give you the information to go into the pre-feas and bankable. This is a milestone-driven project, and as Paul alluded to, we've delivered all of our milestones on time and on budget since we acquired the project in August 2010. We started off with an 8,000-metre drill program. In January 2011, we signed a royalty deal with Anglo-Pacific here in London, who are also a 10% shareholder. We put the maiden resource out in March, which was 76 million tonnes. Jumping a milestone there, we raised around 8.2 million sterling in February last year, all here in London. We got our main board TSX listing in June last year. There was a small area of resource that was owned by a Canadian junior within that land holding. We also consolidated that, an all-share deal. We then completed an additional 13,000 metres in September, October last year. All of that went into the resource upgrade that we put out in January this year. We collected that 200-ton, actually 130, but we've taken some additional material, 200-ton bulk sample. Environmental baseline is underway, and we started this year with that 100 million tonne resource upgrade, and in March, the metallurgical test work. Milestones to roll out. Phase 2 test work is underway, and you should see results coming out on that over the next 4 to 6 months. We are in the final stages of the preliminary economic assessment, and we aim to have that out in June. That will obviously be give you an NPV value of this project. It's going to be a substantial number. And then straight on the back of that, we will move into the pre-feasibility and the resource upgrade work as well. Environmental baseline will be complete in Q4, and the aim is to have a pre-feasibility complete late H1 2013. So a fairly rapid work up on the project. Looking at peer group valuations, it's always difficult, and this week hasn't been a great week in terms of valuations. But this is really a fairly simplistic table. There aren't that many nickel laterite companies out there, and there's only one other direct competitor who is developing a ferronickel project, and this is Anfield Nickel here. They're in Guatemala, they're on the TSX. Similar size resource to us. They're actually about 6 months ahead of us in terms of work. They've put their PEA out. They're trading at 5 cents a pound of nickel today. The other three companies here, you've probably come across. ENK was European Nickel here in London, and they're trading at a range 2 to 3 cents a pound. What I would say with these three companies is they're all limonite deposits, and they're all either looking at heap leach and tank leach. And I think they're struggling in the market because, again, there is not a commercial heap or tank leach operation out there at the sizes that we're talking. We're today trading at 2 cents a pound with a resource comparable to Anfield in terms of size and grade. So we are, especially this week, sitting down the value curve there. Other metrics are what have advanced nickel projects been acquired for over the last 8 to 10 years. And they range from $1.60 there down to 6 cents a pound. And I just want to touch on this second example here. We've already talked about the project, the Once Puma project. A little bit of background. It's 110 kilometres north of us in Brazil, which actually in Brazil is not that far. It was originally discovered by Inco in the 1960s. Small resource. Conoco Resources was a TSX junior. They acquired the project off Inco about 7 years ago for 20 million in cash. They took that project through to full bankable feasibility study, a spend of about $35 million there, and they were acquired in 2005 by Valley for 870 million Canadian in cash, valuing those pounds of nickel at 23 cents a pound. As I say, we're trading at 2 cents a pound today. If you look at all of the ferronickel projects over the last 20 years, they've all fallen with a fairly well-defined sort of pounds of nickel in the ground valuation. During their exploration phase, typically assets range from where that peer group sits, the sort of 2 to 8 cents a pound range. As you move out of the exploration phase, where we are moving out of and into the pre-feasibility stage, they've traded in the sort of 8 to 15 cents a pound of nickel in the ground, and as you move into completed bankable feasibility, it's the 15 to 25 cents a pound. Obviously you need the market to flow through with that, but that is typically where they have plotted at a point in time on that curve. We focused on nickel. We do have an active gold portfolio. The Falcao project is currently where we have activity with Anglo. They're spending 4.5 million there to earn to 51%. We finished a 3,000 metre programme in December last year. We currently have a geophysical programme underway, and we will be drilling in June on that project. All of these projects are fully funded, no cost to the company. We manage the Anglo programmes until they earn in. I don't believe we're getting any valuation in the company today for these projects. We are actively looking at ways of monetising this gold portfolio. And that will either be by way of a spin out or merging these with a pre-existing vehicle in Brazil, and we have a number of projects that we've identified that would make sense there. If we can end up with, say, 49% or a percentage of a 50-60 million new vehicle, it's a very good way of monetising those assets. And also, as you have a project the size of Araguaia moving into pre-feasibility and feasibility, you really want to see one company focused on that size of asset. So it does make sense to move these gold assets into a new vehicle. And obviously Horizonte shareholders will get a share in new gold vehicle. Some basic stats I talked about earlier. Cash in the bank today is 4.8 million. 8p share price. Unfortunately, it is at the bottom of our year trading range. Market cap today is around 23 million sterling, and we have 288 million shares in issue. It is relatively well held, tightly held. Tech Resources today has 42%, Anglo Pacific with around 11%. Quantum Holdings is a private iron ore group in Brazil that we've worked with for 4 or 5 years with around 10%. Richard Griffiths, Aura Capital, has 4.5%, and the balance is out in the market there. So really, to pull all of this together and to conclude, Araguaia, having moved the resource up to that 100 million tonne threshold with the grades that we've got, having de-risked it from the process angle and having a process route in terms of ferronickel, that puts this project now in the upper quartile of assets globally. And it's only one of about 6 or 7 assets globally that is not owned by a major mining company or being developed. So it's a fairly unique position that we're in. We are going to expand that high-grade core, 30 million tonnes at 1.6, 1.7, at the size of operation we're looking at gives you about a 25-year mine life, so it's sufficient to give you what you're looking for there. Number of major milestones over the next 6 to 12 months. Obviously, you have got the support of Teck Resources. Teck actively have looked at getting into the nickel business twice over the last 5 years. A, they tried to buy Inco, and B, when we acquired Araguaia off them, they were actively rebuilding a nickel business, so there is a major supporter there. Our focus as a company is to take this project to bankable feasibility. I think there's probably 3 potential outcomes at that stage. Number 1, we build this operation with Teck at the relevant shareholding. Number 2, I outlined earlier, we have Xstrata 60 kilometres north of us with a similar sized asset. There will not be 2 ferronickel facilities to service these 2 projects. And option number 3 is that there is a compelling offer that comes in during that process, which is amenable to Teck and ourselves, as within that Caneco Resources deal. So we've got multiple options, but our focus as a company is to take this to bankable and then obviously the production decision. News flow on the gold side. And as we sit today, we do sit in terms of low on the valuation, potentially against our peer group there. So that is Horizonte.